The one with Rachel's date is the 5th episode of the 8th season of Friends. This is directed by Gary Halvorson, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And we have 3 parts of the episode, and I'll go through each of them in turn. I'll talk about Phoebe and Monica first, and then Chandler, and then Ross and Rachel. There's a moment with Ross and Rachel that's quite frustrating and emotional, but definitely really interesting, and I'll talk about that when we get there. So, Phoebe visits Monica in the kitchen, and while she's there, she meets a character called Tim, played by Kevin Rahm, and he is Monica's sous chef. And it's because of this episode that I know what a sous chef is, otherwise I would have had no idea. Every time I hear the word sous chef, all I can hear is Phoebe saying, "I sous stand." Very educational. And Phoebe dates him, it goes well, and it turns out that Monica has to fire him because he's just not keeping up with the pace of the kitchen. It's just not going well. And this is going to cause a problem because Phoebe kind of wants to dump him as well because he's just so clingy and needy. And, well, it's going to be a tough day if you get dumped and fired on the same day. Granted, it doesn't seem like Phoebe's been dating him for very long, but nevertheless, nobody wants to be fired and dumped on the same day. So Monica and Phoebe have a conundrum. Who's going to tell him first? And I feel like if I were to say who I think should have told them first, I think it should have been Monica, because at the end of the day, that's a business. There's money involved. Give him longer to find a job. Well, I suppose he'd have the same amount of time to find a job, but let him start the process earlier on so he's got a better chance of finding a job. But that being said, nobody wants to be the Phoebe in the situation, feeling hounded by somebody who's clingy, and they end up telling him at the same time in quite a brutal scene, and he handles it really well. And, well, it's an interesting scene. I quite liked it. I think Tim is a really likeable character with what we got to know of him. And as I said, this taught me the meaning of what a sous chef is. So I quite like that. We then go to Chandler, and I love this. This is such a fun part of the narrative. Ross goes to collect Chandler from his work, from his office, to go to dinner. They're going to the Hard Rock Cafe. And Chandler is talking very briefly with a colleague, and this colleague happens to call Chandler Toby. He called him it once in passing. Chandler thought, well, I'm not going to communicate with him again. I won't correct him. And I think Chandler is right in saying that so much time has passed. It would be really, really awkward if he were to correct him. And then Chandler's boss says that he's thinking of promoting Bob, played by Chris Parnell, Chandler's colleague, thinking of promoting him up to the 11th floor, and Chandler panics, thinking, well, if Bob comes up to the 11th floor where he works, he's going to have to tell him his name isn't Toby. So Chandler says, I just don't think Bob is 11th floor material. The next thing we know, Bob is talking with Chandler because he heard that somebody said he wasn't 11th floor material. Who is this Chandler? Now, first of all, I don't think anybody should ever be told that somebody they work with, or even in the building they work with, said that they weren't good enough for a promotion or whatever was happening if he was brought up to the 11th floor, because that's not a sensible thing to do. If I told somebody, no, I don't think this person is right for the job, and my boss or whoever went to that person and said, well, I was going to promote you, but Amy said you're not good enough, I'd be I'd be furious and mortified. So I don't think it makes any sense that Bob found out about this, but nevertheless, it works within the context of the narrative. And obviously Chandler really can't say he's Chandler now. And we end this part of the narrative, in fact, the episode we end with Chandler walking into his office to see Bob there trashing everything. And Bob says to him, I found Chandler's office, come and help me. And he does, and it's fun. I rather enjoyed it. It's a nice bit of padding for the main narratives, and I thought it worked really well. Oh, and we find out Chandler's middle name is Muriel, which is interesting. And then we come to Rachel and Ross. Rachel visits Joey at work. He introduces her to Kash Ford, played by Johnny Messner, and Rachel goes on a date. And she doesn't want to say that she's pregnant, which I think is not a good way to start a date. Granted, if it's not going to go beyond one date, what's the harm in not telling them? But at the same time, most people will go on a date thinking it could hopefully last beyond one date. Otherwise, what's the point? So not a good start, but nevertheless, she goes on the date. And Ross is really irritated by this. And it's not immediately clear why. But then he does confide in Joey, and he paints this picture of how he always thought with his next child, he'd have a wife and the kid would jump into bed and they'd read the paper together. And there's a little bit of heartache there as we hear him saying that he doesn't get to do this with Ben. And it breaks his heart, and it breaks my heart as a viewer. But what's interesting is how he's talking about Rachel. He's saying he can't force himself to fall in love with Rachel again. When Joey asked him, in this picture, is your wife Rachel? And he says no, and it used to be, but he can't force himself to fall in love with her. And I think he's in denial. I think he's protecting himself from how he really feels. And Rachel's date doesn't go according to plan. She happens to bump into Ross, and he comforts her, and it's a really beautiful moment. And the camera lingers on Rachel once Ross leaves the scene, and there's something about her expression that means she felt something during that encounter. And Ross goes into Central Park, where he bumps into Mona from the wedding. And I have nothing against Mona, but obviously as a viewer, I find this really frustrating, because just as Ross is making small talk with Mona, planning on going on a date with her, Rachel walks into Central Park as if she was going to have a conversation with Ross, maybe a conversation about Ross and Rachel. And it is so frustrating. But it's also great. It's great to know that maybe Rachel can see something between her and Ross. Maybe it was just because she was feeling sore after the date and worrying that now she's going to have a baby, her dating life is, for now at least, not going to be what it once was or what she wants it to be. Maybe that's where her head is at. But as a viewer, certainly at this point in the show, I like to believe that there's more there in that moment when she went back into Central Park. So lovely, but very, very frustrating at the same time. But the whole episode, really enjoyed it. Personal highlights, the whole story with Chandler and being called Toby. I loved it. I thought it was beautifully executed. Some very sweet moments with Ross and Rachel. Some interesting word choice with the way Ross was talking. And yeah, I liked the story with Phoebe and Monica as well. So no issues, no complaints. I think the one with Rachel's date is a really solid episode of Friends, and one I'll always enjoy.